So I just challenged myself to make a front-end framework from scratch in a week, and here it is. Yeah, and that actually should be it. Let's see. Looks about right. Let me add in a component. Alright, there it is. But I kinda wanna see everything at the top here, so I'll just style everything. Yeah, that's much better. I wanna be making web pages, but I pretty much dislike JavaScript and the whole ecosystem, and I have touched on some ROS web frameworks, but those fell off. So I would just rather make something myself than learn a new tool. I did, however, find Hammer, HTML abstract markup language, which is what my tool is inspired by. Like, here's some Hammer code. You got the section with a class of container, then you have a header title from the post struct, then you have a subtitle from the same thing, and you have a div with a class of content, which it gets content from the same thing. And here's some web equivalent, which looks pretty much the same, but without the percentage characters and the like equals whatever. I instead use the dollar and wrap in the braces like in most languages that have that, and I pretty much keep everything the same, and that's pretty much it. I'm guessing I've spent around 3 hours working on this, mainly looking over my notes and just writing the whole scanner to parser pipeline, where basically you first have the scanner that would help the computer start to understand what the file actually means. Like, you have some text right here that pretty much makes sense to us. There's a P, which symbolizes the P tag at the start, and then you have some text like hello. But to the computer, yeah, that's just nonsense. It doesn't actually mean anything. So it needs to be broken down, starting with the scanner, going character by character. So in the scanner, whenever there is an alphabetical character, so A to Z, upper or lowercase, you can just take the remaining join up characters, which are still alphabetical, so basically just the word, and label that entire snippet as an identifier. You also should first check if this word matches like a keyword, so for example a P or a P tag or a O, but that's generally it. And here it just takes the P into the token and goes out to the next character, the white space, and usually this would just get ignored by typical scanners you have, but for this tool it cannot be ignored. It also doesn't really need to be saved as a token. It instead gets stored as a value for the next token to be had. So we keep in mind of this white space and go on to the next character, which is H. So we repeat the word search again, and this would just find us the hello, making that into the second token with space of 1 mentioned. And the last character we have is the exclamation mark, which the exclamation is a special character that would just get stored as a separate token. The scanner also keeps mind of indentation and the line for each token, but in this simplified example, none of that is really happening here. So now, after scanning, that clearly is not over. That still doesn't mean anything to the computer. So now the tokens need to be further evaluated into statements, which happens in the parser. The first token is the P, so that starts the P tag evaluation function, whatever that is, where it iterates through the tokens, making sure they're on the same line and once it reaches the end, it merges the tokens together into a key statement. This still doesn't mean anything to a good computer, which is now where you can branch off into typical compiling or interpreting. But for this specific case, it needs to go into building and in the future transpiling. And this now takes us onto the second day. In this day, I spent about 5 hours fixing up the previous stuff and finally working on node parsing, making general nodes and text work. Afterwards, from parsing the statements, they must now be lastly evaluated, which is sort of the moment where the computer finally understands what all that means, but not really. I've started working on attributes, so in HTML this sort of stuff. In web, it would be written like this. Now, starting around here, the tool began to be more fleshed out because this is when I started working on a for tag, which I call it a special tag, where this will generate this, and well, it just iterates its body like a normal for loop. And from what I remember, I sort of struggled starting on doing this, so I don't think it was working at the time. So I just instead made some sugars, where now mentioning the div is not necessary, as well as for the text, it can be just wrapped in quotes without the P at the start. I also have meant to make like a star to be a sugar to the header tags, but I forgot about them. I'm pretty sure I made the for actually working, but like very constrained because I only wrote up 3 expression types: the assignment, the comparison, and the unary thingy, because for me it's dreadful writing up those expressions. I won't lie, I have no clue what I did then, but looking at my commit history, looks like I just made variables and callables and interpolation. I noticed that I haven't put in as much effort as I thought, or as much as the first day, and since the moment I wrote the for, the next thing I wanted is an if, but I have only wrote the 3 expression types, so I finally did them. Back to the mentioned if, it's just your typical if-else statements. Another thing I made is define, which is finally something that makes this framework worthy, which is just the component creation. I thought this was the 7th day and tried continuing to work on this, and I only really made rebuilding that happens on file changes inside of the source directory, and this is probably the least amount of time I've spent on this due to like sleep deprivation. So the current state, there definitely must be multiple issues, like where at the beginning of recording this there was an issue where an empty tag would crash the entire tool, so I would presume there are much more issues. Also, the for is not safe, how you can write something like this, where that would just loop infinitely until like a memory overflow. So I will later implement safe checking for that. And the future plans to support more tags. At the moment, just like most simple stuff works, wanting an image or SVG is not possible whatsoever. Client-side rendering, with it you have a CSR tag and its body will be rendered on the client side. Next thing would be a feature to be able to serve pages on a port and not just building ones. And I think same as in PHP, you would have both front and backend code in one file. So same thing would be in web, and normally whatever is written is passed in as the body, and server code will be only generated if there's a server tag, but then must be a client or like a body tag to know what should be generated. You have a server block, and inside of it there's a function with its name, and the endpoint which the function listens requests for, and it will only return OK for this example. And underneath it is the body block, which would do the normal HTML generation. Another sub feature with this that I want is a fetch tag, which it would just do a request to the passed in URL or endpoint of the server function, and based on the status render what's up and whatever I think more at the time. Yeah, and that's about it.